Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll go ahead and get started. First thing I want to mention is that the webinar is recorded. And then secondly, there's a chat section in the webinar where you can send messages, or if you have any questions during the webinar, I'd be happy to answer them as we go through the demo. Thank you. All right. My name is Hai. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Matrix. My goals for you today is one, help you understand the basics of Matrix, provide you a framework for you to get the most out of Matrix, and then help you envision what your work and life success may look like with Matrix. Hopefully you're here today because you're looking to be more productive and more effective at managing priorities and emails. That's the basis of Matrix. That's why we exist. And this webinar is intended to give you that introduction. The first question I have is, are you always focused on work with the most impact? Over the years, I've talked to thousands of customers, interviews so many as well. And there's a couple of challenges that I see as being recurring over and over again. The first is that team members seem to have trouble understanding what's priority right now. And what's really interesting is that while many team members understand what they need to work on, there's no coherent place for everyone to be on the same page all the time. And what's really challenging too is that we are working on so many areas of responsibilities. Long gone are the days where you have one task and you focus on that. Instead, you're juggling between so many different areas of work. And because of that, it's even more difficult to keep track on the status of this work. And so as you can see, the vast majority of people struggle with prioritizing tasks in the context of the bigger picture. And then thirdly, emails and meetings are just causing far too much context switching. As you know, you're probably using 5, 10 different software at any point in time during the day. We're talking about chat application, we're talking about emails, we're talking about text messaging, and then in meetings, and then taking notes and project management and so forth. And what's really fascinating is that all this context switching is making it difficult for us to focus on what we need to work on at any point in time. And a vast majority of our customers struggle with prioritizing emails the most. So what is Matrix? It's a comprehensive email priority and project management software to help teams manage emails, conduct more efficient meetings, and get real-time status updates on critical projects and priorities. At the end of the day, Matrix is a communication tool. Now, you've used project management, you have your to-do list, you have your pen and paper, and so forth. The difference between Matrix and everything else is its core focus on ensuring that everyone understands what's priority right now, regardless of the project that they're working on. And then secondly, being one central place where you can actually pull together all these other communication that you've had so then everyone's on the same page. Imagine being able to wake up in the morning, looking at your Matrix and understand exactly what you need to be working on, and there's no questions on misalignment with your team members. That's what Matrix is. So how does Matrix help with these challenges that I mentioned? First, we use something called the 4-quadrant methodology, which I'll go into more details, to promote effective prioritization. Secondly, we provide different views on the data that you have, such as the one-on-one, the agenda, the timeline, to help you understand what needs to be done within the right context. And context is everything. More so than anything, when we are working and we're trying to go about our day, we're trying to understand, what do I need to work on at this moment in time that gives me the most impact? And then thirdly, Matrix provide really deep integrations into systems you already use. In particular, we're probably the most integrated solution in Microsoft Teams and Outlook for very effective email and task prioritization. So what that means is you can take any emails that you get in Outlook, convert it into a task, delegate it, prioritize it, and not only that, communicate to the rest of your team that, hey, this is where this fits in within the bigger picture. And so when you're having a meeting, you know exactly how that all comes together. So you don't have to go and forward emails or flag them or anything along those lines. So what makes Matrix different? First, we're the only Microsoft 365 security certified solution on Outlook, Teams, and web app at the same time. And one of the things that I'm particularly really excited about is the potential in AI to help teams and individuals achieve their goals. In fact, over the past 6 months or so, we've drastically expanded our capabilities around there. I'll show you some of the stuff we have today. But one of the things I want to mention to all of you here today is that if you're looking for ways to make Matrix work well for your specific task, your specific job function, reach out to us and we actually have guides on each of those aspects. And then we provide what I call people-centric collaboration. And so, you, again, as I mentioned, you probably have to-do lists and you've used different types of project management software before. One of the things that's really lacking is the ability to understand what you need to work on for the right people at any moment in time. And one of the things I notice is that when you're working on a task, let's say you're doing something, it's really you're doing for somebody, right? And that somebody could be your manager, that somebody could be your direct report, that somebody could be a client, a customer. And so Matrix flips all of that around sometimes, providing you the right view so then you understand what should I work for this person today. And then lastly, Matrix is available as a SaaS, which is what I'll be showing you today, as well as a HIPAA compliant for healthcare life sciences, and then an Azure government cloud solution, and of course, manage private Azure deployments. If you're interested in any of our enterprise solution, definitely reach out to us and we'd be happy to discuss. So let's talk about the fundamentals behind Matrix. As I mentioned, we use something called the 4-quadrant methodology. Well, the basis behind this is a quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." What I really like about this is it breaks everything that you have to do into the dimensions of importance and urgency. And it's so important to classify things that way and differentiate between what are the things that I need to work on and when do I need to work on it, right? And if you look at it from that perspective, imagine this: take out a piece of paper and write down everything that you have to do. And again, this could be 5 items, this could be 20 items, right? If you have 3 items, maybe Matrix won't be that helpful. But if you have 20, my next question to you is, what do you work on first? Do you start at the top because that was the top of your list, or do you start at the bottom because that's the bottom of your list, or do you do something random in the middle? And so instead of actually having in one long list, imagine you took take those 20 items and start putting them into different buckets. The buckets of important and urgent. These are the things that you're firefighting. And then the bucket of important but not urgent. These are the things that you should be planning for and working on. And then what are the things that's not important? Right, but urgent in the sense that it's pulling on you, it's requiring your attention, but it's not really impacting the bigger picture. And then sort of like the rest, which is the not important, not urgent, which is sort of ridiculous to have that as a concept. But those are the things that you have on your list, but you shouldn't even bother with. So now, instead of having one long list, you have these distributed into these buckets. So when you look at it from a bigger picture, you can sort of categorize these into the quote, do now, the things you should plan for, the things you can delegate, and then the things that sort of everything else. And so we don't use the idea of having something that's not important and not urgent. That's ridiculous. Instead, we use that quadrant 4 as the inbox, where things go in first, and then from there you decide where should I put them, and which of the other 3 quadrants I should have. I recall at a trade show when I was talking to a customer, and he came to me and he showed me his former method, which was a piece of paper where he did all the organizing and planning and so forth. And then he showed me on his iPad Matrix and how it changed the way he worked. And he asked a really powerful question, which is, by the way, if I have everything that's in quadrant 1, then it means I'm just firefighting. That means I'm actually not doing a good job of planning. And it actually was so insightful as a comment, because as you use Matrix and you're planning out your task, if you have everything in quadrant 1 and if everything is important and urgent, then nothing is, right? Again, if you have that same list in top Q1, that doesn't help you understand what you need to work on. So make sure that you have no more than 25% of the things in quadrant 1, no more than 25% in quadrant 2. And then as you get better with Matrix and as you get better with time management, hopefully you don't have much in quadrant 1, because then you're not firefighting and you're actually spending adequate time planning for it. So the 4 quadrants Eisenhower Matrix create alignment because it forces you to prioritize from the beginning. And one of the exercises that I really like to ask people to do is, now that you have your 4 quadrants with your task on it, start walking around the office and compare notes. This is the key. This is where you get the magic of Matrix and how it works so well as a communication tool. Imagine if your manager and your direct reports all have done this exercise that I mentioned, and they put their task in Matrix, and they've organized them into the different quadrants, and you have all these initiatives that you're working on. You get into the office together, you sit down at a desk, and you start comparing notes and see, hey, do we align? Are we aligned on all of these key tasks? Where are we not aligned? And what's fascinating is that if everything is aligned across your team, you don't need Matrix. In fact, you're one of the rare people out there, rare teams, rare organizations that have everything figured out. So success from Matrix is about finding the disagreement. And it is so important to find the disagreement because one, if we can find that there's one critical task that you should be working on, but you're not, or if we find one critical task that you're working on, but you shouldn't be, imagine the time saving that you have every single day. And that's what Matrix is all about, the communication tool to create that team alignment. I do want to mention that webinars are recorded and that we post them afterwards on affluence.com/webinars. And I do want to mention that support at Affluence. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or feedback. I always appreciate that. And with that, I'm actually going to jump into a demo of the Matrix itself. And I am keeping an eye on the comments in case you have any questions during this webinar. So then I'll try my best to address them as I show the capabilities of Matrix. So now you should see Matrix. This is our web app. And one of the things that you should notice right away is front and center is the 4 quadrants. That's what makes Matrix unique. We go and force you to put everything that you have to do into the 4 quadrants. And so you have to have some sort of dimension to it. And in this case, you can see that I have a project called My Personal Priorities that I open here. And within it, I have the quadrant 1, do now, the quadrant 2, do later, delegate, and postpone. Whenever I create a task in Matrix, I have to decide where does it belong, right? And one of the things I like to do is I like to create tasks in quadrant 4. And the reason I do that is from there, I can decide, okay, where does it fit within the bigger picture? So let me show you an example. Let me go ahead and say, I'm going to create a task here. I'm going to say, follow up with webinar participants. And then one of the other thing I want to say is when I create a task, one of the things that I highly recommend you do is always set due dates. And it's fascinating because as I mentioned about the concept of importance and urgency, if you don't know when something is due, how do you know where to put it within the picture, into the bigger picture, right? And so always set due date. And so here I say follow up with webinar participants, but I'm going to go ahead and say due tomorrow. Now, when I create a task in Matrix, our system used what's called natural language to understand that due tomorrow means set the due date to tomorrow. And you can see now the due date is set September 27 at 9 a.m. And when I do that, I'm able to track this task and see the progress as I work through my day. When the task is created, on the right-hand side, we open what's called the item details. And the item details is all about adding additional contextual information about the task themselves. So for example, when I see the task name, I can go and star a task. When I star a task, I'm telling the system, this is important. I need to be working on that, right? And then I can choose an icon. And so for example, since this is email, I might want to put that icon. And it's all about visualization. So then it's very easy for me to look at a task and see, okay, this is what it's related to. And then as I go down further, I can see the owner. So task, when you create, always has an owner. And that's a really interesting thing about Matrix is we force you to have an owner, but we also force you to have only one owner for any task at any point in time. We've seen requests from people that says, hey, I want multiple owners for a task. The answer always come back as no. And the reason is when you have multiple owners, you lack the ability to understand who should be responsible. And so in Matrix, you can only have one owner, but you can have followers. And followers are essentially people who are interested in understanding and getting updates on these tasks. But at the end of the day, it is the owner's responsibility to actually finish this task. And so when you run workload reports, when you try to understand progress and so forth, you can run reports against the owner who completed the task. And then after that, you have progress, effort, due dates, and reminders. And this is actually, I want to highlight this part as being something that's really important. Every task, in my opinion, should have a due date. And then every task should have a reminder. And there's a big difference. When something is due in, say, 2 weeks, and if you wait until 2 weeks to get started, is it going to be too late? Right? And so therefore, you might want reminders ahead of time that says, you know what, something is due in 2 weeks, but remind me in 1 week. And so what I like to do when I create a task in Matrix is after I set that due date, I would set a reminder. So for example, I would go and say, remind me weekly. So what I've just done is I've typed to our chat system, again, with natural language that says, remind me weekly. And now a weekly reminder is set for this task. On a weekly basis, I'll get a ping in Matrix that says, hey, you should look at this task, even though it's due in the future, so I can get started on it. I do this every single day across so many different tasks, and I have zero problem understanding what I need to work on. And by the way, this capability is extremely useful when you have something that's due really far in the future, right? Again, all of us, every single one of you here today are probably overachievers. And that's probably the biggest reason why you would attend a webinar on how to prioritize better and how to prioritize and manage your emails, right? And so therefore, you have really good understanding of your priorities and within the bigger picture. And usually that works really well in your brain for a few days. And so, I got to work on this today. I got to work on this tomorrow. But then imagine you have something that's due in 1 year, or in 2 quarters or 3 quarters. And so that's where these capabilities is extremely useful. So for example, I have tasks that says follow up with this customer in 1 year. And so then I would say due in 1 year, and then I would remind myself in 11 months. And so now again, in 11 months, I get pingers like, okay, now that's top of mind. I can start working on it and actually get to the proper resolution of each of my tasks. And then after that, down here, we have the ability to chat. And as you can see, I can actually talk with the task itself. But at the same time, I can actually assign it to other people and have conversation with my teammate on this task. And the reason I want to highlight this is because, as I mentioned, you probably use Microsoft Teams for chatting. You probably send emails and so forth. The problem is that when you use communication software, you're switching context all the time, right? Because when you're talking to your manager, for example, you're not going to talk about one action item. You're talking about 3 or 4 different action items. The problem is in a month, and you need to go back and review, hey, what did we talk about? What decision did we make? You completely lost context. And so you can look at this chat as conversation within the context of this task itself. What's really powerful about this and useful about it is that when you have a task and you're tracking all of that, and you need to delegate it to a whole new person, that person can go in, look at the chat, and understand the full history of all the decisions, everything that's talked about. It allows you to onboard new people so rapidly. And then additionally, when you have someone who leaves the organization, you still have all that conversation they've had in the past, and that knowledge is still accessible in the chat itself. And then you have the note section. And so one thing I want to mention about the note section, this is where you can create subtasks. You can add additional information about the task itself, but it is not intended to replace the rich text. So you probably use Google Docs, Word Docs, and so forth for that. And so, but what you can do instead is you can link that into your Matrix. And so don't look at this as a way to replace those rich texts. And then finally, you have the resources section. The resources section is where you can associate additional information related to the task itself. I mentioned emails multiple times. Well, imagine if you have a task and then you have multiple emails associated with it. That would go in the resource section. Or if you have files or Word documents or PowerPoints. One of the things that's powerful about Matrix is that every task in Matrix has a link. Every project in Matrix has a link. And luckily, in Microsoft, every email has a link, and every Microsoft Teams conversation and chat has a link. So Matrix is able to link all of those things. So then you can go and put SharePoint documents and so forth. And so when someone looks at this task, they have the full context. One of the other things you can do in Matrix is able to link Matrix tasks together. And so that allows you to build dependencies. And so you could say task A has to be done before task B, et cetera. And so all of that is doable here. I don't go into those details. Those are advanced capabilities that you can use and learn about Matrix as you move forward. And so that is what an item detail comprise of. So all of those action items that all of those additional metadata that I mentioned. So now let's go back to the bigger picture. Again, in the middle, you have the quadrants here. But as one of the things that you'll notice, is that I have a lot of project on my left-hand side. So let's go ahead and switch to another project. For example, I have a project here called Upgrade Technology System for Improved Efficiency and Security. This was an AI-generated project where I said my goal is to update our technology system, and our Party Matrix AI generate these tasks for me. One thing you notice is that we actually use different terminology here. So what that means is that Party Matrix is actually completely customizable. Instead of actually forcing you to stick with one quadrant names or various quadrant names and so forth, when you use Party Matrix over time, you start building your own internal expertise with the system. And so some organizations actually go and adapt Party Matrix terminology to their own. So as you can see here, when I select a project, the right-hand side open up what I call the project details now. And you can also go to the project details by clicking on this icon right here at the top of the matrix. And then this opens the project name. You can star a project. And when you star a project, it jumps to the top of the list, making it very easy for you to find them. And then you have user group. User group you can think of as departments. For example, you might have a marketing project, you might have engineering project, et cetera. So you can actually build user group in Party Matrix to automatically associate project with different departments. Or you can manually control and say, these are the individuals who have access to this project. The way permission works is that when you have a project and you invite somebody, they can actually go and get full access to that project, built to see the priorities. So that's how it works when you're using Party Matrix in a team. So imagine this. You have a project, and from that project, you invite your manager. Now, you and your manager both have full visibility on everything in that project. Now, that project might be your goals for this quarter. That project might be a really important initiative that you're working on. And now when you have a meeting, you can pull up Party Matrix, project it on the big screen, and start talking about the priorities that you have. And then down here, you can actually change the quadrant name by just clicking on the text itself. You can change this text as needed, and then you can click on here to change the color. And that's how you can customize a project. So let me show you how you might create a new project instead. So if you go to project here and you create project, well, guess what? When you create project, we give you several different options. The first is you can always create a blank project, right? Blank slate, it's just a basic 4-quadrant, and you can go and you can decide what belongs in it. Additionally, what you can do is you can actually choose from what we call our public templates. So what happens is over time, we've learned some best practices and so forth, and we try our best to share some of these best practices with you. We actually have hundreds of templates available using different terminology in terms of anything that's related to the 4 quadrants, and you can initiate a project using those terminology. But we have a couple templates that's available here, and you can choose from some of these in order to actually make it a little bit easier for you to get started. Or you can actually choose from what's called your templates. So one of the powerful thing about Party Matrix is that if you create a matrix and you create a series of tasks in it, you can save that as a template. And when you do, you can actually launch a project from that template instead. Let me give you an example. Let's say you build a client onboarding project. And within that, you have 30 different action items that you have to do in order to onboard your client. And that could be, reviewing contract, that could be setting up your system and so forth. And guess what? You might have something due in 1 day, you might have something due in 1 week, something due in 1 month, something due in 1 quarter. Once you create that matrix, you can go and save that matrix as a template in Party Matrix. So then when you have a new client, you don't have to create all those action items from scratch. Instead, you launch one of these templates and then choose the start date. And then from there, everything else is created for you. So at Party Matrix, we value time saving as much as possible. And so you should not have to create anything twice. And so the whole template system is designed for that. And then lastly, we have this option called Create with AI. And this is a relatively new capability, but what it's doing is you can type in your goal, and that could be how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, how to improve my operational efficiency. And our system will go and generate Party Matrix with action items in them for you. The idea is not to replace what it is that you're going to come up with to actually execute. The idea is just to give you a starting point. And if we're able to save you time when you get started on a project, then we're giving you that time back for you to do something more productive. And so hopefully you see Party Matrix as adding value, again, by helping you understand your priorities, helping you communicate those priorities, helping you decide what to work on, and then saving you time as part of the whole process. So now I'm going to go back to the list of projects, and I'm going to go and choose one of my project here. Now, as I mentioned, we have the matrix as the basic view, but one of the things that you can do with per matrix 2 is the ability to jump to different views to see per matrix as the same data, but from a different perspective. So the matrix view, next to the matrix view is the list view. What I like about the list view is that it's very easy to see things that are overdue. So you can see I have the list view open here. I can create tasks. So if I were, some people are more what I would say to-do list, to-do list oriented. Some people are more visual with the matrix. But if you wanted to have a list view, you can go here. Now you still have to decide which quadrant it belongs in. But if you go to the list view, you can sort these things. And so you can see how easy it is for me to say, okay, find me all the tasks that are overdue, or organize it so then I can say that these tasks, find me the tasks that are assigned to me, the tasks that are assigned to my coworker, etc. And I'm able to use the filter to actually filter this entire matrix so then find exactly what I need to work on. And then you have the calendar view. So the way the calendar view works is, again, every task that has a due date shows up here on your calendar. And so again, every matrix gives you a different perspective depending on the context. So for example, when just to explore the idea of context further, when you're in the matrix view, the context is priorities. Show me everything from the perspective of priorities. When you're in the list view, show me everything from the perspective, what are the things that are overdue, or help me sort them. And then in the calendar view, show me everything from the perspective of dates. What are the things that I need to work on? What are the things that I should plan for? So I have a task here I can open, and then not only that, I can drag and drop it, right? And now I can reorganize and reprioritize very easily. And then finally, I have the Gantt chart view. So the Gantt chart view, again, take action items that have due dates, show them in a timeline view, but then if you have dependencies, then you connect all of those together. So I'm going to shift gear and let's talk about emails, because I hinted to you that actually a lot of customers come to us because of problems around prioritizing emails. And unfortunately for all of us, we get a lot of emails. So on a daily basis, I get several hundred emails, and it is very, very difficult to stay on top of it. So I have a question for you. Let's say you get an email that's important and you have to respond to it. What do you do? But you can't respond to it right now is what I mean. Do you flag it? Do you mark it as unread? Do you set a due date for it, a reminder date on it? And then if you have 1 or 5 or 10 unread emails or flag emails, you can still manage it in your mind, in your head. But what happens if you have 50 flag emails? How do you keep track of all of those things? And so one of the things Priority Matrix allows you to do is that we can go and take an email and actually turn it into an action item. So for example, let's say I have an Outlook email here, and this email is something that I need to respond to, but I can't respond to it today, and I need to respond to it in a month. If I just flag it, I have to go and review all my emails on a daily basis to make sure that I don't drop them. So instead with Matrix, I can take this here, and again, when you have Outlook, go to the Outlook App Store, install Matrix. And then when you do, and you click on this ellipsis, you're able to open Matrix and choose Prioritize Email. What this does is it opens a panel on the right-hand side, allowing me to take any email and convert it into a task. I can change the task name, I can choose what project it goes in, and then I can choose which quadrant it goes in. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and choose that, put it in this team project. I can say that this email is actually a high priority, so I choose quadrant 1, and then not only that, I can assign to a teammate, and I can say due in 1 week. Okay, so with this Outlook integration, I'm able to take any email, prioritize it, choose the right context, assign to the right person, set the due date. Now, here's what's really nice about this is if I had forwarded this email to a teammate, they may not know which project it belongs in. They may not know how important it is. And then not only that, they may not get a reminder on when they need to work on it. But by prioritizing this through Matrix, I'm able to do all of those in one step. And so I click capture email. And so you see when I do, the right-hand side become the item details again. And in this item detail, I can see what project it belongs in. I can see the owner. And then again, I can say, remind everybody daily. And so imagine if this email was extremely important, I now get a daily reminder from Matrix to actually work on this and resolve it. Again, where Matrix add a ton of value is on tasks that are much, much further out, right? If you're thinking just the next few days, a lot of us can get by with the system we have. But for things that are much further out, it becomes very, very difficult to be reminded of all of those things. And flagging the email is insufficient for that purpose. And I'm guilty because I do have dozens of flag emails. But at the same time, I always try to add and prioritize the ones that are important. So then I get a reminder to go back to that email and actually respond to it. But what happens if you get an email and you already have a task that's open? So Matrix actually allows you to do something different too. So now let's just say I have an email and maybe this is a client that sends you an email and says, hey, what's the status on this particular task? So in Matrix, you can also open up Matrix. So instead of choosing prioritize email, I choose open Matrix instead. And now instead of actually just turning that email into a task, I can actually attach the email to an existing task. And so you can see I can hover over any item in Matrix. I can search for it if needed, and then I can click attach. And so what that does is it actually uploads this email into that task. And if that task was already assigned to a teammate and that task have multiple people working on it, well, now you have one central place to keep track of all of these emails that's coming in, and you're not losing the context. And so you don't want to go and just take any email and keep on converting them into more tasks. Or if you have 5 flag emails that's related to one context, you don't have the ability right now to organize that. But with Matrix, you can actually take 5 emails, attach it to one task, assign that to the appropriate people with the appropriate due dates, and you have one central place. The neat thing about Matrix is that when you upload this, you actually have the option. So if you go to settings here, you have the option to upload the original email into the item itself. The reason that's helpful is this is my inbox, right? So when I have an email and I prioritize a task, what it does is it uploads it so then my coworker can actually look at that email, open up the email, and they can respond to it as needed. So it is really helpful, again, if you're managing external parties, and then other people can actually browse the original email and make the appropriate changes as needed. So that's how our email integration works. Very, very useful. A lot of customers come to Matrix for this capability. Now, I want to go over to Microsoft Teams because, as I mentioned, we're using more applications than ever before. And at least at our company, we use Microsoft Teams to send a lot of messages back and forth. So I showed you the web app earlier. Now, if you go to Microsoft Teams, you can go to the App Store and install Matrix from Microsoft Teams. When you do, you can open up Matrix here on the left panel. One thing I always recommend is right-click on it and choose Pin. And when you pin, Matrix stays here and allows you to access Matrix really quickly. And you don't even have to open up another application, your browser or whatever. As you're using Teams, you can open up Matrix. And as you can see, when I open up Matrix in Teams, the view is actually very similar to what you saw in the web app. The only difference is the menu is actually hidden up here. And that's just a usability thing. And so then I can still see all my projects, all my tasks, all my matrices, and it's one central place, and it's all synchronized together across all of my devices. Now, a couple of things that makes Matrix unique inside Teams. Let me show you one of them. So let's just imagine if you have a coworker that you chat with all the time, most likely your manager or your direct report. One of the things you want to find out is when you're having meetings, like, hey, what are the status of all the work that we've been working on? So guess what? Matrix has what's called the one-on-one view. So you can go into a conversation with somebody, open up the one-on-one view, and see everything you have in common with them in one central place across all of Matrix. And you don't even have to switch to Matrix software. What it does, this is that people-centric view that I mentioned, which is we take all the things that we have to do, flip it around, and instead of thinking of it from a project to task perspective, we think from people to task perspective, irregardless of the project they're in. Not only that, Matrix allows you to synchronize with Microsoft Office 365. So if your organizations have the appropriate permission, you can actually pull in emails, meetings, documents from Microsoft 365, and you have it in one central place to see within the context of your coworker. Now, the way that you add this is very simple. You go to plus here, and then you choose Matrix, and then choose the one-on-one view. And what's neat about this view is that if I'm in a meeting with somebody, and again, could be my direct report, and I talk to my direct report and say, hey, by the way, could we do X, Y, Z? Well, guess what? I can actually just say, create that task directly here from the one-on-one view. What's really helpful about it is it automatically assigns it to the other person, and then it invites you as a follower. So when your direct report marks that task as done, or your colleague marks that task as done or updated, you get notification that progress has been made. At the same time, you can see that the natural language works here. So when you say whatever task it is, due in 2 days, due next Tuesday at 2 p.m., our system will interpret that and set the due date for you directly from here. This is really helpful to see tasks that are overdue, by the way. So when you are working with each other, you can look at this and say, hey, look at all these tasks that are overdue. Let's talk about them. Let's resolve them or change the due date into the future. The second thing about the way, or the other thing about Matrix and how it works in Teams is how it integrates with other aspects of Microsoft Teams. So for example, let's say again, you're chatting with your coworker and your coworker says, hey there, could you send me a report? Well, imagine if your typical response would be, sure, could you delegate that task to me? Well, with Matrix, you don't even have to open any software to do that. You can hover over any Teams conversation, click on this ellipsis, and create a PM item directly. And you can choose what project belongs in, you can choose the due dates, you can choose what quadrants. And then not only that, Matrix links back to this conversation itself. Let me give you an example. Let's just say if you're in a Teams conversation and you're talking about several different things, and then you come to the conclusion that we should do this task XYZ. Well, then you convert that task into a Matrix action item. 6 months later, you go back and you're like, why did we decide on to do this again? Well, guess what? Matrix link back to that moment in time when you had that Teams conversation, and it opens up and it shows you the context of everything you talked about 6 months ago inside Teams. Now, this depends on your internal policy at your organization, but a lot of organizations have this record of history that allows you to look at the context. And it is so useful because it does not require you to have perfect memory. It does not require you to remember everything. Instead, you just have to go and organize it using Matrix. The other thing you can do inside Matrix Teams conversation as well is you can actually open up Matrix and attach any task directly here. So this is very helpful if, I'll give you a use case. Imagine if a coworker, if you assign a coworker a task, but they didn't get around to it, and for some reason they didn't respond to it. Well, you can go in here, open up Matrix, choose that task, and assign it to them directly here. And so you can send that to them inside the Teams conversation. They can open the action item. They can actually save it. They can view it. They can mark it as done directly inside Teams. The reason all of this exists, by the way, is because we understand that switching context is painful. It is so painful because you have to go open another app, switch browser, and especially, if you're working on so many different things, every time that you do that disruption, it actually takes away from your ability to think properly. And just imagine how painful it is to create a task. You have to open up a software, then go and choose the project, then create a task, then assign it, then set the due date, right? And so that's the reason all of these integrations exist, so that it'll do everything you need to do right there and then. And again, you can continue the conversation as if nothing happened and trust that this information is synchronized over to Matrix and synchronized over across the entire team. So let me go back to Matrix one more time and try to wrap it up into a bigger picture. When I start my day in Matrix, I always start at what I call the home view. So this home view, this is inside Teams. You see the home has a 46 on it. It shows that I have 46 notifications that requires my attention, right? When I look at this view here, it shows me these are all the tasks that's either assigned to me or that I'm a follower on that have been updated. And so in one central place, I can see everything that's relevant, because imagine if you are working across a global company and overnight tasks getting updated because you're assigned to somebody on a totally different time zone, and they update the information, and now you want to know whether or not they updated it and what's the status of it. It's not feasible to go and open up any software and browse through and see the update is there. Instead, you look at the notification to tell you what's actually relevant, and then you're able to click on each of these and go through the list and see what the changes are. Also, if you set those due dates and reminders, like I showed you earlier, when that time comes, it shows back up here in the alert as well. So when I have a task that's due in a year and I set a reminder in 11 months, I can trust the system that on month 11, I'm going to get that notification. It shows up here. I can click on it. And now I know that, okay, I got to work on it. And one of the things I like to do is when I see the notifications, but I can't get to it yet, then I type a new reminder. I can say, remind me daily or remind me next week. And now the system will go ahead and update that again. And so this ensures that I never, ever drop the ball on an important email or important task. And then if you have a lot on this list, for example, actually in my real account, I have hundreds of notifications as well, but you can go here and then you can clear notifications. One of the things I always like to do is clear alerts older than a week, especially if those are, been lingering around. And then if they're important and I have daily reminders, those will pop back up again. The other option you have is the ability to see your agenda. So again, all your action items, but now from the perspective of dates, or you can see all your items across all your projects at any point in time. So to step back for a second and give you a big picture, one, Priority Matrix is intended to be that prioritization communication tool. So then you understand what you need to work on within whatever context might be. You saw the one-on-one view. That's the context of people, right? What do you need to work on for this person? You see the agenda view or the calendar view to see what context, within the context of time, what you need to work on. And then one of the things that I highly recommend everyone does is if you use Priority Matrix, create a project for your personal task, create a project for your team, create a project for a key initiative that you're working on. And then when you do, make sure that all your tasks that you create have due dates and make sure you set reminders. So then you can come back to Priority Matrix, get updates on it. Now, Priority Matrix will actually track how long it takes for you to get anything done. So what's helpful about that is it's just for your own personal productivity. You can see that if you assign a task to a coworker, right, what's the average lead time before these things get done? And so if you're an operation manager or if you're trying to improve the processes around your organization, Priority Matrix gives you that insight. One of the things Priority Matrix allows you to do too is actually go to what's called the workload management. And as you use Priority Matrix more and more, you can actually have better visibility and understanding on what people are working on and how people are performing across the organization. One of the things that's really important and what I like about Priority Matrix is that it's helpful for me to communicate to others how busy I am. Now, I know that all of you here probably get so many tasks delegated to you where you're overwhelmed because you have only 40 hours to work on any week, but you might have 60 hours worth of work. With Priority Matrix, you can actually open up views like this and you can see what your timeline is like what your week is like in terms of responsibilities that you have on any day. And then if your manager assigns you something, then you can push back and say, by the way, something's got to give. If this is priority, then what should we deprioritize? Similarly, if you're assigning tasks to coworkers, use a view like this to understand that, if you assign somebody too much, they're not able to get it done. Now, Priority Matrix allows you to use effort so you can track because not all tasks are created equal. Some tasks take longer than other, but our systems, as you use it more and you give it more metadata, it automatically updates and generate all these reports for you. Now, I'm going to go. I see some questions on the Teams on the webinar chat, which I'll try to get to as soon as I can. I'm going to go ahead and summarize and wrap up my presentation here, and then I'll answer those questions. So let's go back to Priority Matrix, and let's talk about next steps for you. One, if you use Priority Matrix, but you don't yet use it in Teams and Outlook, make sure you install our application and sign in there, because I think it is very valuable. Create those 3 projects that I mentioned. The reason why I talk about personal priorities is because it's easier for you to see that value for yourself first, and then you can see what the value would be for team. Because Priority Matrix is really valuable in a team environment, but at the end of the day, it starts with a person, right? The individual. And then make sure that you create Priority Matrix action items with due dates, and then always put them in the appropriate quadrants. That's the hard work, but that's really, really important. Couple of advice. Make sure they use Priority Matrix to track high impact tasks, because sometimes there are things that are actually really easy to do and not that impactful. You don't want to necessarily waste your time creating that action item per matrix unless it's helpful to you. But if you use it to track critical projects and critical priorities and use that to share with your managers that, yeah, these are the priorities that I have, it's really helpful. Always think of Priority Matrix not as a project management, but a communication tool to communicate to your priorities and to see what others' priorities are. And then lastly, use Priority Matrix to manage your individual goals. Again, the individual is the most important. If you can be productive, then you're getting the most out of Priority Matrix and almost nothing else matters, right? So what success with Priority Matrix should look like? 1, you have one central place to track all priorities. So imagine if you and your coworkers are ever unsure what priority should be, you can open up your Priority Matrix and see exactly what you should be spending your time on. 2, everyone understands and are aligned on key tasks. Now, the most fascinating thing is that you may disagree, and that's perfectly okay. But what happens is if you don't have a Priority Matrix, your disagreement is in the back of your head, or people are not talking about it, and that's far worse. So it's better to actually have all those action items down in Priority Matrix, have that disagreement, have that heated conversation, but then afterwards walk away aligned. If you have repetitive procedures, make sure that you templatize it. So all you have to do is save it as a template in Priority Matrix, and when you do, the next time you have that repeated work, you're going to save yourself a bunch of effort. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to prioritize the critical emails, set the due dates on them, and then, if you actually do stay on top of your Priority Matrix and stay on top of prioritizing email, the most important things won't fall through the cracks. All right, with that, I wrap up my presentation. I'm going to go ahead and open up the questions here. And if there's any questions, I'll start addressing them right now. So the first question is the subscription options in Priority Matrix. So we actually have multiple tiers in Priority Matrix for various customers. Now, you can go and you can install Priority Matrix on Microsoft Teams as well as Outlook for free. So all of those applications start out at free. And if you have less than 5 projects, less than 100 open tasks, and less than 5 collaborators, you can actually use what's called the free tier of Priority Matrix. Beyond that, we have several options for subscription, and it depends on your use case. But for example, if you use on your own, then we have the pro tier. And then if you use it within a team and you use a team within more than 5 people and you use Microsoft Teams and Outlook, we actually have significant discount there. And then IT is able to purchase organizational wide or department wide licenses at significant discount. There are some differences in capabilities, such as the workload report and the Gantt charts are available in the business tier. But actually, if you use Priority Matrix in a team, the business tier is not very expensive at all. You do not have to pay extra to use Priority Matrix in Teams and Outlook. Again, if you're on the free tier, you can actually get started on there. So what a lot of customers will do is they'll get started on there, they'll use the free tier, and then later on afterwards they realize, okay, you know what? This is worth it to invest my time because I'm actually getting value out of the system. And that's our goal. If you don't get value out of Priority Matrix because you're not using it to prioritize critical tasks, you're not using it to communicate your priorities, you're not using it to delegate and so forth, then you won't find value out of Priority Matrix, right? But if you do those things and you're able to save time and effort and identifying the things that you shouldn't drop or identifying key tasks that you almost dropped, for lack of better words, then I think you'll see that value. Is it possible to auto-assign team members who complete a task and free to take the next task, as we are in customer service and we have to answer emails as they come in? So one of the things that we can do with Matrix is we actually have integrations with, see if we can pull this up here. We have a lot of integrations. I didn't show you that today, but for example, we have what's called connectors, allowing you to pull in tasks from other sources. And then we have what's called Microsoft Power Automate integrations. So with Matrix, you can actually build a lot of rules around your system. And so if you're actually using Matrix for your business, you can actually build these rules allowing you to create if this then that environment. So for example, if a certain task get done, then assign this next task to another person, etc. But I think the question here is how you can go and move tasks between people. If that's the case, maybe you can reach out to us, to our support, and maybe describe your use case a little bit more. Then we can go and see if there's something that we can do, out of the box. So can PM projects be exported and archived in another format? Answer is yes. So you can actually export any of your Matrix into a CSV format. So for example, if I were to go back to here, let's say I open up a project here and I have my project details. If you click on this top right menu here, you have a bunch of different options. For example, you can save this as an export as CSV. Again, you can also import projects from CSV, and then of course you can save project as template. So that's some of the other format that you have. Now CSV is pretty standard because from that CSV you can manipulate it and do other things with it. These are fantastic questions. Are there any other questions? A Gantt chart, can you connect from one quadrant to another quadrant? The answer is yes. So within a matrix itself, you can actually link all of these tasks together. So for example, I'll show you how to link these tasks together. Imagine this task here, you go to resources. What you do is you link existing item. And when you do, you can actually choose another item here. And then you can say that it's related. When you say a task is related, it just means that these two are connected and it's just informational, right? And so you say, these two might be relevant to each other. But you can also say block by, blocks, cause by, cause, and then you can see that you can choose any of these tasks within that matrix itself. They don't have to be within a particular quadrant. And then you can say, for example, this item blocks this item. And that's all you have to do. Now look at the resource section here. In the resource section, you can do so many different links. Again, SharePoint and so forth, all directly from here. But now if you go to Gantt chart, you can go to the Gantt chart and you can see the dependencies linked between these various items, as long as they're within the same matrix. Our Gantt chart is not designed to replace Microsoft projects or any of those lines, these other more advanced tools. The Gantt chart is intended to be, again, your communication tool, right? And so you can see that I don't have to go and create a Gantt chart separately. As long as I have action items in part of Matrix with due dates, the Gantt chart is built automatically for me. And then from here, I can export it, for my presentation and so forth. One of the things that, having worked with many different project managers, the reality is Gantt charts are typically used by a project manager as a communication tool. And so we want to make it easy for you to leverage that as well. Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. Are there any other questions? And again, one of the things I want to mention is reach out to me, hi@affluence.com at any point in time. I appreciate the feedback. And then, as I mentioned, if you have a specific use case, your job function or whatever, you can reach out to us and we can try to send you guides for those specific job functions on how to use Prioritization. Thank you for mentioning the ADHD part. Actually, Matrix has been, quote, prescribed by people for ADHD because what it does is it has one central place for you to track all these things. Just get it out of your head. That's the key. Thank you all. Appreciate the feedback.